All right, so we're diving deep today into Mahatma Gandhi.
Right.
Beyond the kind of the typical image we have of him.
Right? The loincloth and the glasses. But there's so much more to unpack.
Yeah, way more. So to really understand him, we're going deep into firsthand accounts, some historical analysis.
Even some philosophical texts to add to the mix. It's about the man, but also especially his philosophy in action.
That concept of satyagraha, which I think is often really oversimplified.
Oh, absolutely. There's this depth to it. It's so much more than just like passive resistance.
Right. So one of the sources you gave me was this firsthand account from someone who actually lived at Gandhi's ashram in 1935.
Ah, yes. That one gives you such a sense of daily life there, that period at the Wardha ashram.
It really sets the scene.
Gandhi was already a global figure, yet he chose this life of utter simplicity, which is a huge part of this, I think.
The author describes like communal service, everybody's hand spinning cloth, real focus on self-sufficiency.
And that contrast is important. Here's this guy with immense political influence, but living so simply, and that really gets at the core of satyagraha. True power isn't from force or status.
It comes from something else.
It's this unwavering adherence to truth, even if it means suffering for it, personal suffering.
And speaking of suffering, the source mentions Gandhi would have an entire day of silence every single week.
And he didn't do it as some kind of punishment. He actually called it a vital spiritual need.
Wow.
Imagine, in the middle of India's struggle for independence, this is the guy leading the movement.
Yeah.
He carves out time for this deep, deep introspection.
It really makes you wonder, what insights must have come from that time?
No, for sure.
But it's not all, serious and suffering.
No, not at all.
The author describes Gandhi as being really warm, like a good sense of humor.
Yeah.
And even a love of good food, which I did not expect.
It's crucial we see those details. They humanize him. He wasn't some unfeeling, ascetic.
Cool.
He was very much engaged in the complexities of life.
Totally. And it's in those complexities where we find the core principle of ahimsa, nonviolence. And he didn't just talk about it. He lived it.
Absolutely.
There's this anecdote the source mentions about a cobra.
Oh, yes. The classic ethical dilemma. Somebody asked him, would you kill a cobra to protect a child? And his answer is so revealing.
Let me find the exact quote. Oh, here it is. He said, "I could not kill a cobra without violating two of my vows, fearlessness and non-killing. I would rather try inwardly to calm the snake by vibrations of love."
Wow. Realistically, though, a cobra, that's terrifying for anyone.
Right.
But the point is, he truly believed violence, even in self-defense.
Yeah.
It just perpetuates the cycle of harm. His life was dedicated to finding a different way.
Which is where we get to satyagraha.
Right, which literally means truth force.
So it's about resisting injustice, but not with physical strength.
It's the force of truth.
Yeah.
And the willingness to accept the consequences of your action.
Which, for Gandhi and his followers, that meant imprisonment, beatings, even death for what they believed in.
It's hard to grasp that level of commitment. But their courage in the face of that brutality,
Yeah.
It really exposed the injustice of it all, woke up the world's conscience.
It's heavy stuff. This idea that enduring suffering for a just cause, it can be more effective than fighting violence with violence.
Yeah.
But there's another layer to Gandhi's philosophy we need to explore, that concept of non-possession.
Oh, absolutely crucial to understanding him.
Early in his life, he just renounces all material wealth.
He was a successful lawyer at the time, too, and his wife, Kasturabai, fully supported him in this.
To give up everything, not out of being forced to, but out of conviction.
It is incredible. And one of our sources, Frayuk Teswar,
Yeah.
he points out that true renunciation, it goes beyond just getting rid of stuff.
Oh, how so?
He says, and I love this quote, "A beggar cannot renounce wealth. If a man laments, my business has failed, my wife has left me, I will renounce all and enter a monastery. To what worldly sacrifice is he referring? He did not renounce wealth and love, they renounced him."
So it's deeper than just the stuff.
Right. For Gandhi, it was about detaching from the desire for things, even when he could have easily had them.
I see. That internal renunciation is what fueled his dedication. It's fascinating. So we've got the man, we've got ahimsa, we've got satyagraha emerging, but then there's this detail from the first-hand account that I did not see coming.
Oh, what's that?
All these detailed discussions about food. Apparently, Gandhi was on this quest for the ideal celibate diet. and he was experimenting.
Now that may seem mundane, but
Yeah.
it reveals how holistic his philosophy was.
Okay, yeah.
He advocated for celibacy as part of those satyagraha vows. And the belief was diet plays a huge role in controlling the senses.
So you're redirecting that energy towards higher goals.
Exactly.
I see. Celibacy, diet, nonviolence.
It's all interconnected.
So what was on the menu? Besides, giving up certain urges.
Lots of veggies, whole grains, even bitter neem leaves, which he seemed to love.
The source also talks about discussions about eggs.
Wait, eggs? I thought Gandhi was a strict vegetarian.
He was, yes, but nuance. He made an exception for unfertilized eggs. His reasoning was it didn't involve taking a life based on what a doctor had told him.
So not just blindly following rules.
He was pragmatic,
Yeah.
willing to adapt when presented with new knowledge.
Which is amazing. Even figures like Gandhi, who seems so unwavering,
Yeah.
they're still learning and evolving.
Right.
It's inspiring, really. But Gandhi's impact, it went way beyond personal choices like diet.
Oh, absolutely.
It wasn't even limited to just Indian independence. It was so much bigger.
Satyagraha had this much wider reach.
It's about social justice, equality, the inherent dignity of every human being, which is where his work with what were called untouchables comes in.
Right, a group that had been marginalized for centuries in India. And Gandhi, he fiercely advocated for their rights. He even said that if he were to be reborn, he wanted to be born an untouchable so he could better serve them. That level of empathy to stand up for the most vulnerable.
Remarkable.
It really is. So we've got this really intricate picture forming, right? We've got the man, his philosophies, the political struggles, the social reforms. But then there's this one element that really surprised me.
Oh, I'm intrigued. What is it?
The connection to Kriya Yoga. The source mentions Gandhi actually received instruction in this from a yogi who visited the ashram.
Yes. And it shows us, once again, his openness to different spiritual paths.
He was deeply religious, but not bound to one single dogma.
Not at all. He studied scriptures from different faiths. The Bible, the Quran, the Zendavesta.
Really?
And he saw truth and beauty in all of them.
Which is pretty amazing, especially for that time, when religious differences so often led to...
Oh, yeah. Conflict, division.
Exactly. But he believed in this fundamental unity of all religions.
That's rooted in love and compassion. He saw spirituality as this unifying force, transcending cultural and doctrinal boundaries.
So we've got Gandhi embracing Kriya Yoga alongside this commitment to a simple life, and even those detailed dietary ideas. It's clear there's so much more to him than meets the eye.
Definitely.
But let's take a moment to let all this sink in. We'll come back and explore more in a bit.
Sounds good.
So we were just discussing how Gandhi saw spirituality as this unifying force.
Right.
And his views on religion, they're actually a lot more nuanced than I thought.
Yeah, it's easy to kind of put figures like him in these neat boxes, but his faith, it went beyond any one label.
He was a devout Hindu, definitely.
Right. Oh, yeah.
But one source quotes him as saying, "I believe the Bible, the Quran, and the Zendavesta to be as divinely inspired as the Vedas."
That's pretty incredible.
For a prominent Hindu leader at the time, that's a pretty big statement.
Yeah, and what's so fascinating is he didn't see truth as belonging to one religion or one scripture.
Like, he deeply loved the Bhagavad Gita, but he found inspiration in the teachings of Jesus, of Tolstoy, even the Jain tradition.
He really did. It wasn't just talk either. He actively studied these different traditions and incorporated their teachings into his own life. And, he championed the rights of religious minorities in India.
Right, he lived it.
Yeah.
Which makes you think, like, what can we learn from that?
Yeah.
Especially today, when religious differences so often lead to,
Well, absolutely. Conflict, division.
Exactly. It's like he's saying, look, we might disagree on the details.
Right.
But can we focus on the shared values?
That's the key.
Love, compassion, nonviolence. Aren't those like the core of all true religion anyway?
At their essence, yeah. And that message of finding that common ground, it feels super relevant today.
For sure. But let's not forget the historical context here.
Yeah.
This is a guy who lived through some serious global upheaval.
Oh, yeah. World War I, the rise of fascism.
The threat of another war looming.
And his response to that, it's crucial to understanding Satyagraha's impact. He really saw war as this ultimate act of violence.
A betrayal of humanity's potential for peace.
Absolutely. Gandhi criticized both sides of these conflicts. He saw violence as a kind of disease, regardless of who was wielding it.
So not picking sides. just against the violence itself.
Yeah. In fact, he warned that the violence of World War I, it would create this kind of snowball of war karma, is how he put it.
War karma.
Leading inevitably to more conflict.
And he was right, sadly.
Yeah. But in the midst of all that darkness, Gandhi offered this radical alternative,
His path of nonviolent resistance.
which challenged the very foundations of power and oppression. True strength for him wasn't about military might. It was this moral force of truth and love.
And again, he didn't just talk about it. He led these huge campaigns of civil disobedience.
That really shook the British Empire.
One source describes Indian satyagrahis facing down armed soldiers
Wow.
with nothing but their commitment to nonviolence.
They were willing to endure beatings, imprisonment, even death, rather than resort to violence themselves.
It's a pretty powerful testament to that idea that even when you're facing overwhelming force, there's another way.
It's like he was saying, we don't have to become the monster we're fighting.
Right? We can win this, but without sacrificing our humanity.
Exactly.
Which feels so relevant today with all the non-violent movements for change happening all over the world.
Oh, absolutely. And it's important to remember, Gandhi wasn't just like a revolutionary. He was a visionary. He believed in the power of individuals to actually create a better world.
And he lived that.
He showed us that it's possible that you can fight for change, but without losing your humanity in the process.
You mentioned war karma earlier, and
Yeah.
it's kind of a chilling thought, especially with all the conflict and violence in the world right now. What did he mean by that exactly?
Well, Gandhi believed our actions have consequences, that ripple outwards. Violence, even when we think it's justified, creates this ripple effect.
That perpetuates suffering.
For generations to come, yeah.
It's like he's asking, what kind of world are we leaving behind if that's our default response?
It's a good question for all of us to consider.
Yeah, it is. So how do we break that cycle?
Well, that's where his belief in the power of the individual is really important. He didn't wait for, governments or institutions to change the world. He started with himself.
With his own choices.
Exactly. And inspired others to do the same. And it brings us back to that firsthand account from the ashram. It reminds us that even these extraordinary people, they're just ordinary individuals
Making choices.
about how they live their lives.
It's not about superpowers. It's about making a commitment to live by your values.
Even when it's hard, even when it's unpopular, even when it feels like the whole world's against you.
It's a powerful message.
And it's Gandhi's true legacy.
Yeah.
That reminder that we each have this power to choose a different path, to resist injustice, to create a more just and compassionate world.
And speaking of choosing a different path, the source brought up this really interesting historical parallel. William Penn and the founding of Pennsylvania.
Oh, yes, an often overlooked event. This is 17th century, so amidst all the violence of colonial America.
Yeah.
William Penn, who was a Quaker, establishes this colony built on peace and nonviolence.
It actually worked.
It did. Pennsylvania, unlike other colonies, they had a relatively peaceful relationship with Native Americans. And their citizens, they were mostly spared from the violence that plagued other settlements.
So nonviolent principles, they can be applied not just to resist oppression, but to actually build a society.
Absolutely. It's not just tearing down the old. It's about building something new based on cooperation, respect, and understanding.
Right. But it's important to remember Penn was still operating within, a system of colonialism.
Oh, absolutely. A system inherently built on violence and injustice. But even within that, he was able to carve out this space where peace and nonviolence flourished, at least for a time.
It's easy to get discouraged with how overwhelming things seem today. But stories like Penn's remind us that change is possible, even in flawed systems.
Yeah, and satyagraha, it's not passive. It requires courage, strategic thinking, a willingness to engage with people who have very different views. Penn had to negotiate with Native American tribes, colonial authorities, even members of his own community who questioned his approach.
So it's that balance, right?
Right.
Of holding fast to your principles, but being willing to compromise and adapt.
Exactly, and that's a valuable lesson for us today as we navigate our own complex challenges.
So from Gandhi's personal struggles with diet and discipline to the global stage of war and colonialism, his message of nonviolence and truth force, it definitely still resonates.
It does.
But I'm curious, how did Gandhi reconcile his pacifist beliefs with the reality of violence in the world?
Yeah.
How did he view World War II, for example?
That's a great question. And it leads us into this deeper exploration of his philosophy and how it evolved.
So we left off wondering about World War II and how Gandhi dealt with that, given his pacifism.
Yeah, it's a really tough question. It cost him a lot of anguish, actually. He hated the ideology of the Nazis, of fascism. He saw the violence and oppression inherent in it.
But he was still committed to nonviolence.
Even in the face of those atrocities, yeah.
It must have been so hard to witness all that. What was his, official stance?
Well, at first, he advocated for nonviolent resistance against the Nazis. He thought there had to be another way, even then.
Really?
He even wrote to Hitler, appealed to his conscience, urging him towards peace.
A letter to Hitler, huh? Did he even get a response?
It was ignored, as you can imagine. And as the war got worse, the Holocaust. Gandhi's position started to shift a little. He realized that sometimes military force might be needed to stop something that terrible. But he was always troubled by the violence.
So less about pacifism no matter what, and more about each situation being complex.
Yeah, exactly. Gandhi wasn't stuck in, one rigid ideology. He was a pragmatist. He knew there weren't easy answers in situations like that. He really wrestled with the moral questions of war, the idea of sticking to your principles, but also needing to protect innocent life.
This reminds me of what we were saying about William Penn. Even his peaceful colony ended up involved in conflict.
Right. It's almost impossible to keep total peace in a complicated world.
Yeah. And it shows that Satyagraha isn't about being naive.
Not at all. It's about seeing violence for what it is, but actively looking for alternatives, pushing for peace, being willing to have those tough conversations.
So recognizing how messy the world is, but not giving up on the goal of a just, compassionate place. But is that even realistic, you think? Given how things are now, violence just feels like the go-to response.
I get that feeling. But honestly, I think Gandhi's message matters more than ever now. We're facing huge problems. Climate change, political divides, inequality. We need to work together globally, get past our differences.
And violence won't solve those.
It makes them worse. Gandhi's offering a totally different way. It's like he's saying, let's put down the weapons, talk to each other, and figure out how we all benefit.
That takes a ton of trust, though, and empathy. Listening to people we disagree with.
No doubt. But Gandhi's life shows us how powerful individual action can be. Systems of oppression, even when they seem huge, they can be challenged, changed. It starts with us making choices every day.
So what's that look like in real life? How do we do satyagraha if we're not facing an empire?
It starts with noticing. Noticing how violence shows up in our own lives. Could be how we talk to our families, how we treat people with different opinions, even what media we consume that spreads fear.
Being aware of how we might add to that cycle of violence without meaning to.
Yeah, and then it's making different choices. Speaking up when we see injustice, even if it's uncomfortable. Supporting groups that are working for peace. Having those tough conversations, but doing it with respect.
And it sounds challenging, to say the least.
It is work, for sure. But it's also powerful. Gandhi believed that true freedom doesn't come from outside us, it's from inside. Letting go of the fear, the hate, the prejudice. And that freedom, it's there for everyone, no matter who you are, what you believe.
So we all have a part to play in making things better. That's hopeful, at least.
It really is. Every act of kindness, every bit of courage, each time we practice satyagraha, even a tiny bit, it makes a difference. It adds to a better world.
Gandhi might have set the bar high, but we can at least try to live by his principles in our own ways.
And you never know, those little actions might build up. They could become something strong enough to overcome all the violence, all the injustice. And maybe we'll get that world where peace and love win out. It's something worth fighting for.
Absolutely worth it. Thanks for diving deep into Gandhi with us. We hope this has inspired you to think about your own role in making the world a little better. Keep learning, keep questioning, keep diving deep. We'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening till the end. Please subscribe, turn on the notifications, like, comment, and share with your friends. This will help more listeners to discover our channel and content.